Hello and welcome everybody to the next edition of Headlines and Beyond. It's the edition week 49 on Thursday, December 4th, 2014. And this week we've got this edition we have two running concurrent themes. We're continuing looking at our psychology of evil, looking at the biblical evil that we see in our politicians, basically. And it doesn't, to a certain extent, extend from our own population, but, you would expect politicians to sort of rise above the norm and provide an example of, if they call themselves leaders, of the way to behave. And this has not been the case. This has been significantly lacking. And I was sort of thinking about, as I was, preparing the notes for today's taping, today's edition, I should say. It came to my mind that that you can't divorce morality from what's going on in the news. I mean, there's an enormous amount of attempt. Well, nobody talks about right and wrong in the news anymore. Well, we know we need to stay objective. We need to sort of, keep an open mind about things. Well, how do you keep an open mind about what's going on with the girls in ISIS? Is it right or it's wrong? You can't keep an open mind about that. It's not. Well, you got to put this in context, really. Rape is all right if what they're doing, because they may not know that it is wrong. Here we have this is where morality and what you believe really does matter. And say, well, this is a Christian broadcast. And other people will say, because I often call I've been calling the Christian fundamentals not fundamentally Christian, because they aren't. If you go into the definition of Christ, you go and you see what the early church was like, and you actually do a study in Greek on the Greek church, on the early church, which was primarily, it had the Greek language as a common language, but you have to go east. It's not a Western church, it's an Eastern church. Understanding the Eastern church and the origins of the Eastern church, and seeing its comparison to the Western church, you begin to understand there's a significant difference between the two. And a lot of the distaste that we see describing the Western church, which is now viewed as Christianity, isn't there. I mean, and the thing is, if you understand that the Eastern Church existed prior to the Western Church, Christianity wasn't European. Christianity became European in 1000 AD. So if you're talking about Christian being European, well, you're missing 1,000 years worth of Christian history. And this is, again, it's completely left out of the news. I mean, there's an enormous amount left out of the news. That's why we're here. Is because there is so much left out of the news that there needs to be a narrative that sort of brings this out. And we can see, and we'll demonstrate as we go edition by edition, week by week, day by day, I'll show you where the different problems are. And that, you do need to talk about morality, you need to talk about right and wrong, and that there is a fundamental understanding of right and wrong that is actually universal, but is not included in most of the world's religions. And as I say, most of the world's religions, in some form or another, are immoral, because they excuse behaviors such as violence and rape. And they're at the core of the problem when you see these problems presented in the news. But the news and the journalists, who are supposed to be investigative journalists, never cross that line and say, okay, let's look at the morality of the issue. Not let's look at the issue, let's look at the morality of the issue and see where it places, how it fits. In other words, the analysis that is supposed to be behind the story, the investigation that is supposed to be part of the journalism, isn't there. And so, in many cases, most journalism, in some form or another, plays into propaganda by the government or any other number of political groups. So the way I chose to fight propaganda is with proper investigative journalism. Investigative journalism, in many ways, is a science. It's just like research science. So it doesn't matter that, well, you're a physicist. How do you know? What do you know about journalism? Simple. I know the research. I know how to do the research. I know how to test the different ideas out. I know how to look for independent sources. I know how to look for independent confirmation to see if a story from one side is true or another side. If you have 2 or 3 different sides talking about the same issue, you can say that story is probably true, and you can go in and see to what extent it might be true. To what are the different factors in there. And one of the factors that I'll be talking about now, and this is one of the titles in here, is going to be really inflammatory, and it's called "All Us Perverts in the Christian Wrong." If you go into the story of ISIS and the rape that's being done by the girl by ISIS to the variety of different girls in Syria and Iraq, to look at the actual situation there. There are a number of moderate Muslims who will come up and say, well, this is not what's represented in the Quran. And there is an argument that this is somehow the behavior that we're seeing with ISIS somehow is exceptional. It's an aberration of what Islam is. This is not the way Muslims typically behave. But if you look around news, and you look into what's going on in Muslim communities around the world, you will find honor killings, you will find rapes, you will find sexual assault, and you'll find in every section, and this is one of the reasons, if you go back, and this is part of the hard part that I had to go through, and I'm still doing this now, I'm vetting some of the statements of rape from the Bosnian War, from what happened from the war in Yugoslavia. And one of the statements that come out is, and this is a true statement, because you see this, with the way honor killings are, in other words, if your daughter is raped, then a father must kill her daughter, and that's what ends up happening. So, in many cases, the women are shamed into believing that what happened to them, the violence that happened to them, was their fault. And this narrative is like, wow, yeah, these are Muslims. What do you expect from Muslims? And you'll have a whole narrative on the Christian right, which I call the Christian wrong now, saying, well, this doesn't occur in Christianity. Well, it occurs in the Mormons, has occurred in the Mormons. Has occurred under the Roman Catholics. It occurred because they're the ones who created the whole situation of a royal Christ, a kingly God, and reinstated slavery again. I mean, prior to the papacy, prior to 1000 AD, and that was the advent of the papacy, slavery had been abolished. There was no slavery prior to 1000 AD. The Roman Empire, the Christian Roman Empire, had abolished it. It's very clearly that Christians are not supposed to have slaves. That they're supposed to adopt the slaves that you have, the servants you have in your house. You're supposed to be adopting them as family. And this is the whole message of Christ was no kings above us, no slaves below us. This was the message of Christ. This is what caused Christ to be crucified, because he was upsetting the order of things. He was threatening the authority of the Jews at the time. And I'm talking about the Jews. I'm not talking about the entire population of Hebrews. I'm talking about the Jews are a specific definition of a religious group. It's a religious definition. It's not a secular definition. You need to understand that not all Jews are, using the general term, right? Using the general term Jews. Not all Jews are Jews. They're not. That's the religious definition. A Jew, by definition, must be Orthodox or greater. In other words, they must adhere to the Torah and the Talmud to a degree to which all other issues are secondary. In other words, their godly law comes first, the Mosaic law comes first, and everything else comes second. The Jewish people of this order believe the Jewish people are first and everybody else is go in. They're second. They're below the Jew level. They're not sufficiently Jewish. And this is why you have groups who decide who is and who isn't a Jew. And you'll see that every once in a while someone declares themselves to be, and they call them an undeclared Jew because they haven't been affirmed by a council of Jews, a council of elders. And again, this is, again, something that is primarily religious. And so if you're an atheist and don't believe in God, then there is no way you can be there's no way that you can be a Jew. Because atheism, which is a non-religious thing, it's a secular thing, has no attachment to a God. And because it doesn't have attachment to a God, you can't say it's Jewish. Because Jewish is it's a theological term. It's a term about God. And if you're atheist, you can't have that. So, and then this is sort of where we start seeing that a lot of the violence that goes on in the world, and the things that we find distasteful, go back to what a person believes and the fundamental beliefs within that society, or country or whatever. And where you see again in socialism, we are humanists. And they have these humanists, they have the liberals coming out and saying how human we are, how humane we are, we treat everybody as equals, and so on and so forth. And one of the key players, one of the sort of the icons of socialism, is Sweden and the Netherlands. In other words, a lot of the Nordic area seems to be one of the golden child, if you will, the standard to which socialism needs to be achieved. But if we look at Sweden, you'll find that and in Denmark, there's a huge history of pedophilia. And it's an open history of pedophilia where there isn't a view that it's immoral to have sexual relationships with a child. Because sexuality is open, they believe that you can have sex with a child without hurting them. That there is no if you're a socialist and you're in many cases you're an atheist, there is no soul. Everyone's an animal, and so therefore, affecting someone psychologically doesn't exist. It doesn't. You can't enter that you can't enter in a secular court evidence of psychology, because psychology, which means study of the soul, the psych part, the psyche, and that's psyche in Greek is the psych. You say it in Greek as psyche, but it comes out in English as psych. That means soul. The logi part, the logi part, means study. So psychology means study of the soul. That's what it literally means. But if psychology no longer believes in the soul, in other words, man is an animal, and we are simply physical, we are of a material existence, that's about it, then there is no soul, and if there is no psychology. So in other words, they've deleted psychology from their own intellectual perspective, and this is where socialism really contradicts itself. Socialism contradicts because how can you be intellectual and conceptual if there's no soul and no mind? They were simply a mechanical function of the brain. But yet, we see this, and we see that in Sweden and in Denmark, that there is a history, a nationality of pedophiles, and of pedophilia. And the thing is, it's one thing to say, well, this is wrong, and have it be done by individual. It's another thing for a nation to stand up and be proud of it, and not have other Swedes and other people of that nation say, hey, you don't represent my views. But that's not what happens. We see that Sweden, everyone's proud of the socialism. Everyone says this is what you should be looking towards. And so if that's the case there, if the people who claim to be good don't have a problem with pedophilia, they don't have a problem with open sexual contact with children, then they're a nation of pedophiles. And we see this as being presented as normal. Anyways, when we come back, we will get further into the headlines. We'll bring the headlines out, and we'll get into a lot more of this particular analysis here. Anyways, see you on the other side of the break.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Welcome back, everybody. We're now on the other side of the break. We're going to go into the headlines now, and we need to tackle this issue from a perspective of from the perspective of morality. We need to look at what's going on in the world in terms of our analysis, not only in the political aspect of it. We need to go further into the law, to ethics, and to all these other different areas, because they're all founded on morality. If your morality is amoral, in other words, it's ambiguous, then everything else is going to be ambiguous as well. And then we can sort of demonstrate this to see that, as the United States has moved more and more towards a secular society without having a standard of morality. In other words, morality is whatever you want it to be. So some people say, well, this is my morality, that's your morality, and you have what we call multiple truths. Then all of a sudden, the line of where right and wrong is becomes significantly blurred, and you start beginning to have what I term a psychopathic society, a society that has no idea what is actually right and what is actually wrong. And I said there is a standard here, and we can observe this, and we will in many cases we will demonstrate that what we are seeing is something that is immoral, and that will demonstrate this is immorality. That there is a standard here. And the first thing we go into is the crisis in Ukraine. And it says there is now a watch because apparently there has been a disaster at one of the nuclear plants. There's been an accident. It's not being reported in the news. It's sort of buried in the background. But of course, why would it be put out front and center? Because Europe is now in charge of the Ukraine. Before, when Chernobyl happened, it was part of it was part of the Soviet Union. It was all over the front page, and people say, well, this is worm war, the world's going to end. You had a lot of conspiracy theorists come out and say, well, this is it, this is the end of the world. Just like, in 2012. 2012 was supposed to be the end of the world. And, well, here we are at 2014, and, well, I can safely say the world hasn't ended yet. So, and yet. And the thing is that we see that Europe now has been openly, with the instances and sort of the push of the United States, openly supporting neo-Nazi groups. They're starting to support the sort of whole nationalist concept of, that Ukraine needs to be European. And this is a dialogue that is very familiar to myself, because I'm from a family background that was essentially Eurofied. In other words, we were Asians, we weren't Europeans. That's why I'm Asiatic Greek. We were Greeks from Turkey, and from the Orient and from Syria. And the thing is that during the emergence of the Western Empire, a lot of the Eastern states were destroyed and turned into European satellite states. And what you had is a slow, what we call Europeanization of these particular areas, and so that the identity, the unique identity, the Asiatic identity of these countries in sort of, it's called the Caucasus region, lost their unique Asian identity and became absorbed by Europe as being a part of a new Eurocentric identity. And this is what we have here in sort of the Euromaidan protests, which began early on, I think in November of 2013. And then what we have is by February, that Euromaidan protest evolves into a coup that overthrows in February 2014. The government is overthrown, and a new European favored government was installed. And of course, this is the origin of the Ukrainian crisis. So after the United States involves itself in a coup and overthrows a properly elected government because it was no longer going to become European, right? So you have a leader who says, I'm not going to be European now. I'm going to go back to the Russians. I'm going to be something else. I'm not going to be European. Well, that's when they overthrew him. They said, well, this guy is a bad guy. And they did the same thing to Bashir al-Assad in Syria. In Syria, everything was fine up until the point in time when Syria no longer wanted to be part play the puppet of the United States. This is what happened in Iran. Iran was the puppet of the United States. As soon as Iran decided it did not want to be the puppet of the United States, the United States went in there and overthrew its government, and this is what we have today with Iran. And the United States has done this all over the place. The United States, when it's gone into areas, and the same thing with Europe, instead of allowing a free democratic society to exist, they always created and this is how they create the situation. This is what's known as false flag. In order to create a war to destroy a country, you can't openly go to war if you're the good guy. What you have to do is you have to pay bad guys to go in behind the scenes and start causing trouble and say, look, there's problems over there. We have to go in and save these people from themselves. And this is exactly what happens. This is how a overthrow occurs. And what happens? You install a government that is friendly to you. This is what happened in Korea. This is what happened in Vietnam. This is, again, Iran. This is what happened all over the Middle East. So if you look at all these, and this is what has happened. If you look at the School of America, look up the term School of America, do a wiki search on this or a Google search on this, you'll find the School of America was a CIA-run school that produced the dictators that became infamous for the horrors that evolved in South America. This includes death squads. Again, this includes gang rape, that we saw in Africa. I mean, these are all these things start popping up again and again. They're being pushed by the United States. They're being pushed by the Western world in order to keep the rest of the world part of their sphere. In other words, this is a fight over a sphere of influence. And how much of the world do you control? This is imperialism. This is empire building. This is not democracy. And so what happens after 1945, basically, is the United States stops being the good guy and actually becomes the bad guy. But in order to keep the idea of the good guy alive, that the United States is still the good guy, you have the United States behind the scenes sending the CIA in creating the narrative that they have to go to war to protect these people. And what happens is you'll see the Republicans will say this war is just. They'll give you a reason why this war is just. But the people on the left, the Democrats, won't do that because they don't believe in any morals. They say everyone's morals are okay. It's whatever you choose. There are a number of truths. So they can't say that. They can't talk about morality. So what do they talk about? They talk about legality. They talk about rule of law. And they say, wow, this person over here, this leader over here, they broke X amount of rules. Look at what they're doing to their people here. And again, the events that are going on the ground, the chaos that's going on the ground, the revolution that's going on the ground, it was not created by the government. It was created by these CIA-funded groups designed to go in there and create the chaos. This is what happened in Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was a whole country. What happened? There's oil in the country. Yep, there's oil there. And the reason why there's oil there, this is what Hitler was after. Hitler and Napoleon, when they went into the Soviet Union and into Russia, Napoleon went into Russia, and Hitler went into the Soviet Union. What route did they take? They took first Yugoslavia, and this included Latvia and stuff like that, and then they moved into the Ukraine. Why? Because there's oil there. There's oil in the Caucasus region. Who is the main oil company? Who was the main oil company in the Caucasus region? Royal Dutch Shell. This is where they got their start. So you have a major oil company in there dictating foreign policy, saying break this country up into small little spheres, small little countries that cannot fundamentally rule themselves, and then they become part of what we are. And this is what the whole Bosnian and Croat situation is that produced these horrors that you read about, that is very similar to what you find in ISIS. Except this time it's being done by the Serbian troops, but it was also done by the Bosnian troops. The Bosnian troops were the same way. The whole culture of rape, and this rape culture, does not have any borders that define it. It goes across cultures, so it's on either side. And you can see this in Kosovo when you had in the UN camps, you had Albanian organized crimes or Albanian pimps going in and picking up and cherry picking the girls they wanted and sending them abroad. There's a whole thing going on, and the UN and the United States knew about this. They knew what was going on, and they still continued to fuel the conflict. Why? Because they needed to break up the states. They needed to break up Yugoslavia so they can go in and Europeanize. They need to westernize that whole area there. This is the expansion of NATO, and you can see how NATO has expanded through terrorism. In other words, NATO has picked up the terrorist narrative. They've picked up the terrorist line, and they've started pushing it forward. And they're doing the same thing in the Middle East, right? And the thing is that you have a number of people who are basically starting to point this out. And the thing is, you have the Syrian Prime Minister talking about the creation of ISIS. Well, the thing is that if you look at ISIS, going back to ISIS, and you go back into the history of what Islam is about, you look and see that in Toronto, that a Somali girl was killed after she married a non-Muslim man. You see this in India. You see this all the time. You see the honor killings. You see the rapes. You see the gang rapes in India. And the thing is, you realize that this is part of the Muslim culture. And the thing is, this is, again, you can differentiate between what the Hindus are doing, because the Hindus have problems too, and we will talk about this later on, and what's going on within the Muslim community. And the thing is, there are no moderate jihadists. And the thing is, yet you have the United States insisting that there isn't. And so initially, you're saying, you see the narrative initially, if you go back into history, most people don't go back. And then this is recent history. The United States is talking about, we have to overthrow Bashar al-Assad because look at all the problems he's creating. He's killing his own people. This was the narrative, right? But if you look at what was going on, it was all the jihadists doing this. Who was funding the jihadists? The United States was. They had their CIA people behind there. And what do you have here coming up? You have here a list of now coming up who's going to join ISIS. And the reason why you have these lists, because this was going on before. You have close to 2,000 Britons going to Syria and Iraq to fight for ISIS. Right? The estimate, this is the estimate from the UN, and this is a low level, this is a conservative estimate, is that there are now 15,000 foreign fighters inside Syria and Iraq working with ISIS. In other words, this is what the United States has produced. This is a CIA-funded war, and this is what's occurring. You see the horrors of what's going on in there. You read about the rapes. Some of the girls have been allowed to, talk about the rape because they wanted to show people how horrible it is. And you have two girls from, I think it's from Australia, who flew there. They say, they flew there and no one really knew. They snuck off and they went to ISIS. They joined ISIS, and now it looks like one of the girls has been killed and the other one is pregnant. Well, they haven't been killed. One girl wasn't killed. They were raped. And the thing is, how do you sneak off as a kid? How do you get the passport to sneak off to go across international borders and end up with ISIS on your own? This narrative in the media is off, is wrong. No one goes off by themselves and says, I'm going to join this thing here. No one does that. This is a narrative that was created to hide what's gone so horribly wrong. And the thing is, you also find, what else do you find? You find that these Islamic militants, these militants that were supported by the United States, they're using chemical weapons. They're using the same weapons that the Syria was used of having. So what was going on? Well, what usually goes on? These were false flag operations set up by the CIA, set up by the United States. And the thing is, it's not just somebody myself that said that. Ron Paul said that. Look at the conspiracy theories on the New World Order. See when they talk about false flag operations. You'll find it. You'll find the information there. Not all the information from all these different groups is right, but you'll find the basic understanding of what a false flag operation is. And as you start connecting the dots, you begin to find that some of the stuff is indeed true and some of the stuff isn't true. And this is where we have to sort of go through and sort of pick this stuff out, is that you can't simply dismiss a source because you believe that it's wrong or it's too, inflammatory to be real. You really have to sort of put your own ideas aside and say, well, okay, who else is saying this? And start finding other sources. And as you start finding other sources that talk about these different things from different perspectives, then you can say, well, maybe there's something going on here. Anyways, we're going to come back on the other side of the break here. We're going to take a bit of a break. We're going to come back, and we're going to continue on with our headlines for this particular episode. Alrighty.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Well, we're back again. And I said we were talking about a report of, I use a variety of different sources. I don't name my sources here because we're in a situation that a lot of these sources are very not skittish in terms of that they're false. Excuse me. But we have a situation that a lot of information is not. If this information gone out and became standard public knowledge, there'd be a problem. Because it showed that the United States is actually behind a lot of the horrors in the world, that they create the narrative for war, they create the whole need for war. And this is one of the reasons why Ron Paul has been more or less been shut out of politics, because he himself has come out and said, and this shows that the evil exists on both sides. They have their own justifications, their own morality for this. And this is what I talk about, these moral narratives that that everyone believes that their own morals are right, and they all these morals, these sort of religious morals, all have back doors that say, well, war is justified if, rape is justified if. And the only one that doesn't actually have a sort of an if clause that justifies this is the early Christian church, and this is what I talk about, the fundamentals of Christianity. The fundamentals of Christianity is what Christ stated. And Christ has stated that whatever you do to him, and this is in the gospel, I will get a quote for this, an actual reference, that whatever you do to him, whatever you do to the least, whatever you do to the lowest member of society, you do to him. Right? And then and he also goes forward and said, and this is in the Apocalypse too, for God, that whatever you do to the lowest person, you also do to God. So if you're a Christian, and this is what it means to be an Orthodox Christian. An Orthodox Christian, if you identify yourself as an Orthodox Christian, and those who do identify themselves as an Orthodox Christian, they believe this. They believe that everyone's supposed to be equal. There's no kings, there's no serfs, there's no slaves, that everybody's equal because we're all called within the family of God. This is what you're supposed to believe as an Orthodox Christian. And this is the fundamental of it. That there is no organization, there is no institution. The Orthodox belief is in the family of God, the family of Christ. God is the Father, and Christ is your brother. And this is for everybody, male or female, and there is no differentiation in terms of your spiritual capacities. What you see as your formalities is what they call oikonomia, the management of the house. And so they have the clerics. They're simply to manage the house. They're the servants of the house. This is actually where we get our term civil servant from. The whole concept of civil servant and democracy actually comes from the Christian world, from the early Christian world, because the people of the house who ran the house are your servants, they're not your masters. So this whole concept of the civil servant, of being serving the people, and this is where the name came from the Christian narrative. But the thing is, at some point in time along the way, about 1000 AD, this whole concept of a civil servant was completely rewritten, and now the servants became the masters. This is the situation we exist today. The European idea of Christianity, the Western Christianity, the Christian right, which they call the Christian wrong, believe in a masterful Christianity, that there is a master in Christianity. They look at God Almighty. They have lost and forgotten God the Father. And you can see this. You can see this whole thing when they talk about the morality of going to war, the justness of going to war. Even the Roman Catholics have the justness of going to war. Why wars in certain cases are just. And there is no justification in Christianity. So this is where, something needs to be said like this, is that, and I say, well, if you're an Orthodox Christian, then you really need to start sitting down and doing something about this, because there is no out for you. If you're an Orthodox Christian and you're a leader like Putin or some leader of Serbia, and you consider yourself to be Orthodox, then you need to get in there and start doing something about these rapes. Rapes are not Christian. They're not moral. There is no excuse for this. There is no out for this. You need to get in there and do that. If a Orthodox leader like Putin or someone else who claims to be Orthodox, and this includes the priests, this includes the bishops, if something is not done about the rapes, they have to get in there and they start dealing with the issue, then they are guilty of raping Christ. And this includes the priests, this includes the monks, this includes the bishops, this includes the upper levels of society, this includes anyone who claims to be a Christian, does not push their Christian government, their Orthodox Christian government, to start doing something about rape in wars, or rape in general, but particularly rape in wars, particularly under the command of these so-called Christian soldiers. If something is not done, they're all guilty of raping Christ, and they will be answering for this when they die. And the thing is that this is how you tell whether a leader or not is actually Christian. When you see Putin going into an Orthodox Christian church, when you see him doing his prayers, if he does not start working on the situation and providing a clear solution to this, he's not Christian, he's lying. Because he is guilty of raping Christ. And the same thing with the Moscow Patriarchate, same thing with the Serbian synods. Any synod that does not deal with rape within its church and within its people, and this includes the soldiers who are fighting for the Serbian side or whatever Orthodox side they are on, they are guilty of raping Christ. And this is why things need to be said and things need to be done. There is no right under Orthodox Christianity. There is no excuse. There is excuse everywhere else, but there is no excuse here. And this is for me where I say, okay, this is the point we can start working on something here. Because everybody else, all the other religions, all the other moralities have excuses for rape. There's a justification for it. This is why you have the 42 virgins given to an Islamic martyr for murdering and killing people. The ISIS people there, the ISIS Muslims, who are like all the other Muslims around the world, they're not different from the moderate Muslims. And you can go out and actually prove this. They're immoral. They're perverts. The original Christian martyrs went to the graves peacefully. They did not rape. There was no justification for rape. And God does not, under the Christian God, under the real Christian God, not the Christian wrong, or the Antichrist papacy, under the real Christian church, God is not a pimp. He does not provide a hedonistic society for the martyrs. He does not provide a brothel, 42 virgins, for his martyrs. This is a perversion of God the Father. And so what you see here, because Allah, in many cases right now, as a standard refers to the Muslim God, not the Christian God, the real Christian God. Allah's God. These are the martyrs of Islam are Allah's perverts. And there's no other way to put it. And the thing is, if an Orthodox person who is a real Christian, who really believes in the Orthodox Church, who understands the Orthodox Church as being the family of God, the family of God the Father and Christ the brother, and understands that when you rape a person, you're raping Christ, you're raping God, you're raping your Father, then you need to start doing something about this. There are no excuses here. There is no way out unless you sit down and start working on this. And this has to do with all of the hierarchs of the church, the so-called hierarchs of the church. And I call them so-called hierarchs because there is no hierarchy in a family. In a family, everybody is equal. This is what Christ was all about. Everybody is equal. The hierarchy exists simply for the management of the house, for functional reasons. There is no status with the hierarchy. Everybody's equal. This is why Christ's life was what it was. And the thing is you see the Ron Paul and other people who are not necessarily originally Christian, but coming out and saying this is wrong. They show this is the statement from Ron Paul saying that Iraq and Syria is immoral and illegal. He uses the term morality, but again, he's not a proper Christian, so you can't say that he's got a degree of morality because his morality has a way out. The same thing he says, the whole mess that we've been involved in the Middle East has been technically illegal because we initiated the war. In other words, here you have Ron Paul admitting, because he's got access to a lot of different things, particularly the classified reports that the Congress gets. They're passed around to all the Congress. And he knows that this is illegal. But the thing is, you don't need to have access to a classified document to know what's going on. A lot of the stuff is out there, publicly, that what's going on is wrong, that the United States started this war. That this is their own creation. This is their own mess. And the thing is Ron Paul is not the only one to stand up and mention this. That you have, people in Israel talking about what's going on in Israel and saying, the apartheid that's coming up. That you're now having a Jewish Nazi government forming. This is what Netanyahu has been and was. And you have all these so-called Christian right leaders, the Christian wrong as I'm calling them now, dying to become part of the Christian right. You see this on Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck calls himself a Christian, but again, he's a Mormon, so he's got a way out. He's a pedophile like all the other Mormons. And, unless you fix your morality, then I'm sorry to say this, but you are tarred and feathered by the fundamentals of what you are. I am a proper fundamental Christian because I'm an Eastern Orthodox Christian, and I believe that when you rape somebody, you're raping Christ and God, and that something needs to be done. And this is my way of doing this is through journalism. I'm going to be trying to change things. Journalism is effective. It can change things. You're not going to change a lot necessarily, but if you can start working on something, this is the way to do it. Without going to war. You don't need to go to war and kill somebody. It's not about being violent. It's about reducing the violence in society. Reducing the violence that is in the world. Reducing the amount of wars. This is democracy. This is freedom. This is real democracy. This is real freedom. And this is the fundamentals of Christianity. No kings above us, no slaves below us. And if you believe that, then everything else falls into place. But if you don't believe this, you don't have this narrative in your background as your base, then this is why we see the horrors we see. This is why we see what you see in India. We see all the rapes that are going on in India. Looking at all these different problems that are going on in India. Why are they happening? Because they have a pluralistic society. While they may abhor certain things, they also understand that because they're in concert, they have multiple gods, some of them who are demons. While one law under one morality says this is wrong, this is immoral, you'll have the demon society saying, hey, there's nothing wrong with this. This is reality. This is life. And because each are equal in law, everyone has their own truths. You may convict somebody over here under one Christian law, under immorality, and then you excuse them and release them under the other. And the thing is, you say this as you read through, right? And you go, there's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of stuff here that we still have to go through here. And then one of the people came up, and this is where I want to get to, is one of the people came up and said that something was wrong, that you're seeing what's going on here is wrong, and this whole expansion of NATO, which is actually a Nazi thing. The one person who did stand up who was really of note is Henry Kissinger. And many people associated with many people associated with Nixon. He is associated with Nixon. But the thing is, if you read the guy's work and read what he's talking about, this guy's got a lot of credibility in terms of world understanding, in terms of foreign policy. And he's approaching this from a foreign policy standpoint, saying that the new Cold War, and he calls us a Cold War, that the United States is creating is going to be a massive problem, that the United States is not going to win this Cold War, because instead of being the defender, defending freedom, it's creating totalitarian, it's creating the next dictatorship. And when we come back, we'll see how this moral narrative evolves into what's going on in Ontario and how it stems from what happened in Sweden. All right, we'll see you on the other side in a moment.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Alrighty, so we're back from our bit of a break here, and this is our last segment, and we're gonna try to finish up. As I said, we're gonna get more of these out on a regular basis now. My notes are up to speed, so things should work out all right. Well, we talked a lot about the Christian wrong and the immorality of the so-called Christians, and demonstrated that the original Christianity, the real fundamentals of Christ, does not allow for rape. There is no excuse for war. There is no excuse for murder. That we were all equal. And that what we see here evolving from the West is a rewrite, a deformation of the original Christian ideas. So this is why I call them the Christian wrong, and I use stronger terms for the papacy, who fits the definition of Antichrist. So when you're talking about the papacy, we're talking about the anti-Christian papacy, that they are the church of the Antichrist, and you call the papacy an anti-Christian papacy. And there are a number of documents, ancient documents, that refer to this, that view the papacy as the enemy of Christ. And these papers, from most perspectives on the left, probably wouldn't enter into much of a narrative or an archive of the news, because these are what people call, or what the left calls, so-called miracles, where there have been appearances of the Mother of God. This has to do, if you want to look this up, look up the Mother of God of Kursk. That's the famous Russian sub is called the Kursk. Go look at the Russian sub that sank called the Kursk. Do a history on that town, particularly back at World War II. And you will find the origins of the Mother of God of Kursk. And it's from here you get the narrative that the papacy is viewed as the enemy of Christ. And the only enemy of Christ that there could exist is the Antichrist himself. So, and while we have this here, and we do have an attack, we call an attack on the Christian right. It's not an attack, it's a revelation of what's going on. It's a peeling back of the mask, of the so-called Christian mask. The left are not excused either, because the Christian right have a pretense of morality. The social left have completely abandoned morality altogether. Morality is whatever you feel it is. It's your own identity. So it's an individual as a person. So if you feel that rape is okay, and that it's just sex, and this is what you see in Hollywood, there's all the time in Hollywood, rape is just simply sex, and you see this coming out of this whole narrative came out of Sweden. And you see this includes children. There is no issue that you're having sex with children, because they are sexual objects. There are sexual beings, and this is what you have. In one of the articles was found that as going through all this stuff, doing the background research, it was the whole narrative of what has gone wrong with feminism. They were showing a picture of all these ladies in skimpy bikinis. Well, they weren't in skimpy bikinis. They're basically pieces of string. And they say, what has gone wrong with the feminist narrative? Simple. There's no morality behind it. You need to have morality in order to deal with the evil. The thing is, Philip Zimbardo and a number of psychologists have identified this objectively. They have evidence of this evil. You can point this out in psychology, where the evidence, you can observe this. And there is no other term for what is going on with ISIS. What went on in Bosnia? What happened to the Bosnian women who were written there? Some of them were 12 years old. And ironically enough, both the Jews and the Muslims believe 12-year-olds are adults. And if you go back into American history, you will find 12-year-olds in brothels. So it's within American history as well. So it's not something that is outside of what we call the non-Christian standard. And I'm including the West as non. The West is not fundamentally Christian. They are a pagan god with a Christian face. That's about all they are. And this is why a lot of people are saying, "Oh, these things, the Christian things, are pagan." Well, yeah, because what's happened is the inside of the Christian faith is gone, and all you have is the facade left. As long as someone looks Christian, looks like a holy man, that's what they are. What's underneath doesn't matter anymore. The substance doesn't matter anymore. And as the substance doesn't matter anymore, what happens is that as you have this evil going on, as you have this pedophilia going on, when you have a group like Parents as First Educators, which is done by is a Catholic group, they're not talking when they're passing around petitions trying to stop Premier Wynne, who is a leftist. She's basically a socialist, social left person, and she is a pedophile like her Swedish predecessors, and her Swedish ideology. They can't talk about morality. Why? Because the Roman Catholic Church, who created slavery again, they reintroduced slavery into the Christian Church, has no narrative, has no morality on this. They can't say anything about it because they've altered and compromised their morality. And this is what they've done with war too. They've created a justification for war when there is no justification for war. The reason why Christ was crucified on the cross and did not come down and slay everybody, because there is no revenge. There is no justification for war. There's no justification for violence. Christ was setting the example for Christians that they are supposed to die for their faith, because for a Christian who is going to be living eternally, that you have eternal life in Christ, there is no death. Death is a facade. It's an illusion. And so you have the original Christian narrative saying violence is wrong and there is no justification. There is no vengeance for a Christian. We are supposed to turn the other cheek. We are supposed to be forgiving. We are supposed to love our neighbor. That means loving our neighbor means we are supposed to love and forgive our enemies no matter what they do to us. This is the Christian narrative. This is the fundamental Christian narrative. Do you see this in the so-called Christian fundamental? Do you see this in the Christian right? No. Do you see this in the papacy? Look at the 1,000 years of crusade. Look at the Crusaders. Look at the warriors. Look at what they created. Do you see this in the papacy? Look at the war between the Protestants and the Catholics, sanctioned by both sides of the churches in Ireland. Is this the narrative that you see in the original Christianity? No. And so when they came to start looking at what was going wrong in Ontario with the homosexuality that's coming in, they had nothing to say. They simply say, "Oh, parents are angry with it. We shouldn't be doing this to children." But why? Why shouldn't you? What's the reason? Why shouldn't you be sexualizing children? Where's the narrative behind it? Where's the, and they have none. And that's because they have completely abandoned what they believe. The Christian church is now hollow for them. There's nothing there. There's the facade of the papacy, but that's about it. Everything else is simply an issue about rights and human rights. It's no longer about morality anymore. Morality is no longer the issue. And we say that as morality is eliminated as an issue. This is when the horrors pop. This is what we see in India. India is, again, this pluralistic society with a lot of different morality in there. We see what happens. Look at the Indian news, which is not presented here in Canada or in the United States. You don't see what's going on in India. Read the Indian news. Go and read their initial sources. You know, this is what I did for Israel. I didn't listen to what a bunch of groups said about Israel. I went to Israel, looked at the Israeli, online, and looked at the Israeli media. What's being said in the Israeli media? This is where I get my narratives from. You go and you find multiple sources, and from these multiple sources, you can get an idea of what's going on. This is how this news is compiled. And the thing is, Sweden has this history of pedophilia, and what happens now, and they're proud of it. They're proud of the same thing. Sex education in Sweden, which is sexually open, has been an obligatory subject since 1956. It's usually first introduced to school children between the ages of 7 and 10. In other words, the Swedes begin sexualizing their children from the age of 7 years old. And this is considered by the left to be normal. There is no issue here. And then you see this blind narrative, this ignorance, this complete ignorance by the social left academic, the so-called intellectuals. And you can't be, there is no such thing as an intellectual socialist. There is no intellectual socialist because you can't have intellectualism, you can't have ideas without a soul. They don't exist. If you don't have a soul, if you're a collection of chemical reactions, that's all you are, then there is no intelligence, there is no intellect, there is no intellectualism, there is no concepts, there's nothing there. You're random. You start off as random, you are random, and you will die random. That's it. No further than that. And yet, you have this ignorance, this pretense by these arrogant and conceited, ignorant academics. And they come out, and we saw them in Ferguson, we still see them in Ferguson, coming out with these bullshit narratives, there's no other term for it, in Ferguson. We see what was going on in Ferguson. The police, it's racial bias, they're going in, they're beating up black people. Okay, maybe. But if you start reading around the news for a little bit, what do you see? You see that a crew from Al Jazeera was attacked. You see most of the news crews were attacked. Their cameras were stolen. You see people being robbed at gunpoint. You see carjackings going on, and it's all by these so-called peaceful protesters. Of course, none of this was presented in the major American media. This is stuff you have to dig and find, way back where. None of it's presented. Well, we don't want to present this stuff because it will detract from from the narrative of whatever his name is. I forgot his name in Ferguson. It distracts from that narrative, so we can't talk about it. So what happens? They go on pretending that in Ferguson that everything is so-called A-OK, even though everything's being taken from around. And you have this. It's Michael Brown, right? Michael Brown's father supposedly stated that he wanted a peaceful protest. Same thing with most of the, like Reverend Al Sharpton and these guys here, the sort of propaganda crew for the social left. And this is the black narrative about this stuff here. And people say, why can't you call them African Americans because they're not Africans? And I don't want to insult the real Africans that I do know, who are from Somalia, who are from Ethiopia, they're not like the blacks in North America. They're completely different. The society and culture is completely different. It's not the same that you have in the United States. What you have coming out of Kwanzaa and this whole sort of intellectual movement is the completely false narrative. It's not real. It's a hallucination. And the thing is, you see this. You see that you see the crowd turning and attacking all the various different media. But you also have reports by the media themselves. And we'll go into this a little bit in the next edition. We'll go into this a little bit further, showing that the police were attacking everybody. They were going after when they were trying to control the riots. they were attacking the police. They were arresting they were attacking the journalists. They were arresting the journalists. They were firing bullets and tear gas at the journalists. And it didn't matter whether they were white or whatever they were, as long as they were carrying a camera, and even though they said the word press, they had the word press clearly written on their jackets, didn't matter. The issue here is where you go back to this whole Stanford University experiment, the Dr. Philip Zimbardo, and this is illustrated, the power, the degradation of power. When someone has authority, you give these people a blanket authority. This is abuse of power. This is abuse of authority, and this is what typically happens in these situations here. And so what happens? But the thing is, the left doesn't care. The left believes in burning down society. They believe in these flames. This is why you have the nihilists. This is why you have the anarchists out there. It's part of the socialist narrative. It's part of who they are. And this is why they're also pedophiles. There is no morality there. There is no right and wrong. And so Wynne, who is a pedophile, believes that what she's doing is right because she saw what her predecessors in Sweden have done. All over Sweden, this is normal in Sweden to have sex with children. This is normal. This is what the Swedes believe. And so there is your leftist narrative. This is who they are. And so this is why you see what you get with Obama. It doesn't matter what he does. It doesn't matter that he's supporting war or bombing people or behaving like a tyrant, because this is who he is. He believes whatever is right for him at the moment. This is his morality. This is the morality of the left. There is no morality. Anyways, that's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow with not tomorrow, we'll be back on the weekend with another edition, the weekend edition. My notes are better now, so. Anyways, my name is Dr. Daniel Karras. You're watching Headlines and Beyond. Analysis and news you will not find anywhere else. Nobody else is talking about this stuff. No one else is presenting this information here. Alright, take it easy and goodbye.
Welcome to the library, and I am the librarian. I am the professor. And professor of what? Professor of physics.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Free speech rules here at Democratic Earth.